What's been most important in terms of Housing First in Europe is that despite all these different Housing First services working in very different contexts in terms of what the housing market is like, whether or not there's social housing, what the social protection or welfare systems are like, also what the health service and health systems are like, mental health services. Despite all these differences in context, all these Housing First services have proven remarkably consistent in delivering very high rates of housing for homeless people with complex needs.
I think there is overwhelming evidence that Housing First works, especially in the United States, in Canada of course, and in France. Research has been carried out with very strong designs, randomized controlled trials for example.
Alors les premiers résultats, il y a tout d'abord les résultats en termes de maintien dans le logement. Donc on voit que plus de 80%, on est à peu près à 86% de gens se maintiennent dans le logement au-delà de 2 ans. Donc ça c'est le premier résultat. Après on a eu les premiers résultats de l'équipe de recherche quantitative sur l'ensemble de la cohorte à 12 mois. On voit qu'on réduit de moitié les temps d'hospitalisation. On voit qu'on va améliorer la qualité de vie, certains indicateurs autour du rétablissement aussi, et puis des éléments autour de l'inclusion sociale. Donc ça c'est des points importants, ça veut dire que en gros, ce qu'on peut dire, hein, c'est que d'un côté, les gens vont être probablement un peu mieux avec une meilleure inclusion sociale, et que d'un autre côté, on va avoir des gens qui vont être engagés dans un parcours de soins. Donc on va réduire les séjours qu'on appelle inadéquats, c'est-à-dire des gens qui vont aller à l'hôpital, mais au fond, sans amélioration de l'état de santé. Et puis évidemment, les gens qui restent dans le logement. Donc ça, c'est vraiment un point qui donne de l'espoir.
I think we have a growing evidence for Housing First. In Denmark back in 2008, when we decided to adapt a national homelessness strategy, it was actually assessed that there was a reasonably good evidence base from other countries already that Housing First was a good approach to rehouse homeless people. So it was decided in the Danish strategy to make Housing First the overall principle of the strategy already on behalf of the existing evidence from many other countries.
You can't just start with an effectiveness study, it's crazy. First you need to do the process evaluation, and if the implementation is sufficient and if the Housing First is really according to the model, then you know that you really can look for outcomes on the client level.
Like all successful ideas, Housing First risks being a victim of its own success. There's a danger that as Housing First is scaled up around Europe and even around the world, that it gets diluted and it loses some of what makes it really work. That's why the key principles that we work through in this guide are so important.
If you look at process evaluation, then I think 2 things are very important. The first is to investigate the implementation of Housing First, because if Housing First is not well implemented, you don't have an intervention. And then the major questions are who is involved, who are the partners, under what conditions is Housing First being established, what are the contributions, etc. And another vital part of a process evaluation is what I call an evaluation of the quality of the program itself. And then I think it's very important to investigate what is the target population, what are the goals of the Housing First program, what activities do professionals perform, what are their relations with, for example, caregivers, other professional services, etc.
En tout cas, on aura des éléments qui vont nous permettre de voir pourquoi ça marche, parce que le fait que ça marche, là, on commence à en être convaincu avec les premiers résultats. Mais je pense qu'il faut creuser un petit peu plus le pourquoi ça marche et quelles sont les conditions nécessaires et suffisantes pour que ça marche. Donc mettre en route, dans le cadre d'une implantation à venir sur certaines villes, ces conditions, voilà, les repérer et faire en sorte que les bons acteurs soient à la bonne place et les bons outils aussi soient au bon endroit.
So housing retention, the question how long and do they really have stable housing careers after getting their own dwelling and receiving the support which is needed. I think that's the most important question. But then, of course, there are all these questions about further social integration. What about the quality of life? What about overcoming problems with addiction, with mental health problems? What about social isolation? Housing First is uses a harm reduction approach, so we can't expect everybody to be sober and living abstinent after a short time, but still there's a hope that people stabilize and if they are using substances that they can do it in a way which doesn't cause a lot of harm to them. And that depends on from project to project. What, for example, in Amsterdam, they measured very intensively the question of nuisance to neighbors. Is there a lot of problems in the neighborhood? How are problems, if they come up, which is relatively rare, how are they handled with? What are the consequences? There has been a lot of studies in Canada, in the US, also in Australia about the costs of homelessness. Not only using homeless services, but especially using other services like hospital, the ambulance, the sobering up room, the criminal justice system. These are all areas where costs can be produced by homeless people, and quite a lot of costs. But in Europe, we still have quite a big need for more robust research. One can say that what is called the gold standard in evaluation is the randomized control trial. You take the same group of homeless people, you play a lottery and say half of them go into Housing First, the other half gets treatment as usual, and then you see if you have done it properly, you can really compare. It's like an experiment. It's not so easy to do it, and you need a lot of people. You need to make this to get this right. It has been done in the US quite a lot. It has been done recently in Canada in the biggest evaluation ever on Housing First, but it has also been done in France now in Europe. But I would still think that other methods, including just qualitative interviews and with relatively small samples, can tell you a lot about also why does Housing First work and how does it work? What are the elements bringing people to keep their housing after having a long career, always being in a cycle?
Yeah, in the evaluation, we basically used outcome measurement. That is, we set up a monitoring system that on individual level could see whether people got housed and what kind of support they got, and then how was the situation continuously? Did they keep their housing, and what was the situation also on these other parameters? But we chose from the beginning not to use a very rigorous research design, because we prioritized from the beginning to have a quite large scale program, so to have scale rather than a relatively small program, and that involved also some choices on the monitoring, that it should be a fairly simple system that measure like the basic outcomes such as the housing retention rate, so that municipalities were also eager to take on board the project and not to use too extensive resources for documentation. But that is, of course, always a balance.